Welcome back to the Padilla Family Homestead. This video is for my aunt. She got a new mixer for Christmas and we haven't been able to get out there for me to show her how to make bread. So I'm going to put it on a video so it's handy for her. This is not sourdough and it is not gluten-free. This is a quick, easy gateway bread into making bread. This is actually kind of the recipe I started with. I actually couldn't find the recipe and I was winging it. I haven't made it in like 3 years. So I changed some ratios, I'm pretty sure, and because I made 1 loaf instead of 2 and started getting this going. So it works, it's delicious. I made a loaf. I've been in the kitchen for like 7 hours today working on one project after another, and I want to make sure I get this up for her so she can make some yummy bread. And she actually loved this bread when I made it back in 2019 and 2020 when I was learning how to make bread. So 4 simple ingredients. I had put hot water in here because I knew I was going to be talking for a minute, so it is now warm, which is what you want. It is 1.5 cups of water, and we are going to put 2.25 teaspoons of yeast in this. This is active dry yeast. Now I bought this huge packet of yeast in 2020. It was still sealed until today. It's been sitting in my freezer and it did just fine. So this jar, when I opened it, I put it in this jar, and now this jar will stay in the freezer. So I'm putting 2.25 teaspoons of yeast in my water. And then I'm gonna let this kind of activate. Now if it's too hot, it'll burn it. If it's cold, it's not going to activate the right way. It should kind of start to like get foamy. If you put a utensil in here, it's going to stick to it. So I am going to stir this in, but I am leaving this spoon in here for a few minutes while it sits. I'm going to get this back in the freezer. Okay, so the next thing we're going to add is salt. Now I give it a second before I do the salt because the salt can stop the yeast from doing its thing if you do it too quickly, is what I have learned since I used to make this. Now I used to just put both in there and let it go, and it seemed fine, but I'll tell you, I feel like today was a great rise, and I did them separate like this. So I'm just wiping the little yeast granules off my measuring spoons because I do not want the yeast in my salt. So I'm doing exactly the same amount of salt, 2.25 teaspoons of salt. And I'm gonna just stir that up. And we're gonna let this sit for a few minutes, and I'm gonna share some tips and tricks with you that I have learned when it comes to problem solving dough rising. So number 1 is when we go to have this rise, we want to put a damp cloth on top. The reason why it needs to be damp is it needs that added moisture. And so we want to make sure that we're giving it the environment that it needs. Yeast also needs warmth, whether it's sourdough, the natural yeast, or if it's active dry yeast. It needs warmth to rise. So if your house is super cold, it's not going to rise really well. So you need to have it in a warmer place. My house is normally a lot colder in the winter than it is in the summer. Today I've been baking all day, so it's not as cold, but I'm still gonna pop the bowl in the kitchen closer to the stove area where it's gonna pick up that heat and it's gonna rise better. Now I don't want it anywhere on direct heat, so if I'm like cooking in the oven, I'm not putting this sitting on top of the stove because then it'll cook in the bottom of the bowl. So you wanna watch your temperature on where you are cooking it for success. If your yeast is not doing its like bloom and activating, then you might have old yeast. It should be stored in the freezer or the refrigerator. Freezer, it's good for like, I want to say almost forever, but I really don't know for sure. But it's a long time in the freezer. It stays fresh. And then in the refrigerator, it's for a few months. But you do not want to store it out at room temperature. It loses its activeness a lot quicker. So just make sure you're keeping that in mind. So our first 3 ingredients: 1.5 cups water, warm water, 2 1/4 teaspoons of active dry yeast, 2 1/4 teaspoons of salt. We only have one more ingredient. So I have my dough hook here attached to the mixer. This is my last one that I have the coating on. Eventually I will get that off. I will get a different one, a stainless steel one. But all I'm going to do at this point is do a stir. Again, everything's coming off of my spoon now. I don't have a bunch of pieces. And I'm going to pour this in to my bowl. And I'm going to scoop any of this stuff that's at the bottom of the bowl out. There we go. Put it over here. So my next ingredient I'm going to put in while this is going, and we're going to do about 3 cups of all-purpose flour. I have organic all-purpose flour that I buy in bulk and just store in a jar. So I am going to put 3 cups of this in. I'm going to have this set on setting 2 on my mixer, and I'll actually bring the camera up and point it over so you can see what it looks like as it's coming together. Okay, so we have our mixer on 2. I'm going to keep this on real speed so you can kind of see how long this is going to take to do. It really comes together pretty quickly here. Now, I had said it takes about 3 cups. It should be 3.5 cups. That is the exact measurement of the all-purpose flour that you want to use. And you're going to see here when I do 3 cups, I'm using a 1/2 cup measuring cup here. And as I'm putting in the 3 cups, it's not going to stay together right. It's going to be too loose. And so when we get to that point, I will point that out. But once I get all of this in, I try to let it mix up enough to where the water mixture is really getting into the flour. And then I will up it to speed 4 for a second. And it usually spurts all over the place. So up it to speed 4. And that's going to tell me if I have the right texture for sure or not. So as you can see right here, it's starting to come together, create that mass that it needs to be. And basically this is kneading the dough for you, and it's saving your arms and hand muscles and so forth. So this is great for, like, my aunt would have a hard time kneading. She needs a no knead recipe. So this is a perfect recipe for her. Okay, so you can see here everything's kind of come together, but it's still sticking to the edges. So I'm going to up it to speed 4, and it's kind of just sticking everywhere. It's not staying formed. And that's when I realized, whoops, I forgot to put in the last half a cup to make it the 3.5 cups. So I go ahead and I turn it off. I add that last half a cup in here, and it is going to come together perfectly. Anytime you're adding flour back in, you want to start back at that speed 2. That way it doesn't do what just happened right there. You don't, unless you want flour everywhere. You want to start it at speed 2. Let it really continue to incorporate all together until it starts grabbing it well and staying together. And then you can up it to speed 4 for a minute. So it really doesn't take long for this to come together. And then once it's grabbed it all up, I upped it to speed 4 there. It's really going to knead it against the edges there and give it the oomph that it needs to really pull the dough together. And you can see here how it's not sticking to the edges. It's actually hitting it against the edges and doing the kneading. And it's not all loose like the last time we hit this point. So this is what you want your dough to look like, and it comes together super easy. You really only let this go for a minute or two, and then you are done. So I stop it here and I make sure I scrape off any flour that's sitting on the top right there. I turn it on for another second, pop it up to speed 4 really fast, really get anything mixed in super well, and then it's done. Okay, so now it is ready to do its first rest. And I'm just going to take this off of here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it rise in this bowl. I'm going to take off my dough hook, and I have a wet paper towel. You can use a wet towel if you have it, a flour sack towel, but a lot of people starting off with bread don't have all the little things, and this works. This is what I started with, so this is what I'm showing. So the dough's just sitting in here. I'm putting a wet paper towels over it. And then because I have a whole lot going on and I have a fan right here, I'm also going to put a plastic plate over that. So I'm stopping all the air from circulating and drying it out and letting the paper towel add the moisture. So at this point, it's going to sit here for 2 hours. And we will be back in 2 hours is where you want to keep it in that warm spot and leave it covered for 2 hours. That's it. And then we'll come back, get it ready to go for the final rise for 30 minutes, and then we'll put it in the oven. So join me back here, only a couple seconds for you, but it'll be a couple hours for me. Okay, so it's been about 2 hours, like just shy, but my dough has over doubled. So depending on, again, the warmth of your house will depend on how quick it rises, but this is what it's going to look like. So we're going to get this out. And I have a parchment lined baking sheet here. And we are just going to take this. Okay. I'm going to take it and just lay it out like this. So it's going to create an oval log. Now we are going to let this rise for another half hour. What I do is at this point, I place a oven safe bowl in the oven with water in it on the bottom rack. And then I preheat that. So I have a Pyrex, little square Pyrex that I have on the bottom shelf in the oven. I'll preheat the oven to 450, and I'm going to set this on my burners to rise for the next 30 minutes. And then what I'm going to do is I will take you and we're going to score it just before we're ready to put it in, and I'll show you that step. And then we'll pop it in for 30 minutes and let it cook. So in about an hour, we will have delicious bread. So I'm going to go ahead, and I already have water in the oven from the last loaf I made, so I'm just going to leave that there. I'm going to go turn on the oven and set this on the burners and let the oven preheat and let this do its final rise. And it's going to still rise quite a bit. I have a good section right here, 2 sections, and I have another couple of sections over here, same on each side. So you're going to see the difference here when we go to score it. It'll be quite a bit bigger and poofy. So I'm going to go get that going, and we'll be back in a minute. Okay, so we have risen quite a bit. It's been the 30 minutes. So you could take a knife, and you are going to, this is the knife I scored the last time with, and you are just going to add some score marks. You can be fancy or not fancy. I am usually not super fancy. As long as you're going in a little bit, if you don't give enough room for gas to escape, then it's going to find its own spots to escape. So it's good for you to do this. So now this goes in the oven for 30 minutes at that preheated 450 degrees. Look at that delicious bread. So what I like to do is pull this parchment off the pan and then let it cool before you cut into it. I know it sounds so tempting to cut into it right now, but you do not want to. Once you let it cool, you should be able to cut into it pretty easily. And look at that delicious bread. We have been enjoying this. This is that first loaf I made earlier. It's amazing. So right now it feels rock hard, okay? As it cools, it's not going to be rock hard anymore. And then I like this bow knife. It makes cutting super easy. I got this one from Whispering Willow Farm. They have them at Ballerina Farm as well. But I really like these. Otherwise, a knife, I believe, with a serrated edge is what you would want. But that's it. Super simple recipe, 4 ingredients, same day dough, and you can tell like I cut deeper here than I did on these. And so this, I would probably should have cut these a little bit deeper to let more air escape. But yep, so that's the importance of scoring it right there. But we're gonna let this cool, and I really hope that you enjoy this bread recipe. It's great. We've used it for sandwiches. We have used it to cut in half and make garlic bread out of, dip it in soups, whatever. It is really, really good. So if you don't have sourdough or you don't want to mess with sourdough, you need a same day recipe. This is it. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, whatever day you're watching this. And Auntie Mary, I hope you like your bread. I will see you guys on the next video.